I am filming the light, bro. That's really nice.
Like Inception.
That's really nice. Yeah. Why not?
Should I film the light too?
This is the new Cannondale Habit. It has 130mm rear travel, 130mm fork, and 29-inch wheels. We tested it as a part of the trail category. It's been over 3 years since Cannondale last released a new version of the Habit, and with bigger wheels and more travel, this is a much more aggressive bike than that one was. So what's changed from the previous generation? Probably the most obvious thing you'll see is that this new Cannondale Habit doesn't use that single-sided lefty fork. Instead, it opts for a Fox Float 34. It's a 435mm chainstay, which is similar to other trail bikes that we're testing. It's got tube-in-tube internal cable routing, which is handy for anyone who doesn't happen to have their own personal mechanic. The seat tube angle is a pretty conservative 74.5 degrees, and the head tube angle is 66 degrees. The reach on the size medium that we tested is 430mm, which is just 10mm longer than the previous generation, which came out in 2015.
I was super comfortable climbing on the Habit. I wasn't too high, I was pretty low over the bike, and I really didn't have to stretch for the cockpit. It was just exactly what I want in a trail bike. What I really liked about this bike is how it sucked up the little tiny bumps. I mean, there's lots of little roots out here, and you're chattering up the climbs and putting down a lot of power. And this one just muted every little tiny bump. Where I ride most of the time, I like bikes with lots of anti-squats and a really firm rear end, because most of the trails have smooth sections and the rough stuff comes in segments. But out here, that doesn't work. It's the chatter pretty much all the time, and the Cannondale has just the right balance. It picks up the bumps, the suspension's a little bit more active, and I would normally think that was bad, but out here, I really carry a lot of speed, and it's exactly the right thing.
The one thing to note on this bike is that Cannondale recommends setting it up at 22% sag, which is a lot less than the 30% that we're used to seeing on other bikes in this category.
Cannondale designs each of the frame size with a slightly different kinematic because they're concentrating on the change in the rider's center of gravity over the bike. The taller riders actually sit higher, they have a higher center of gravity. Lower riders, lower center of gravity. So if you don't get the sag right, you're not going to be able to take advantage of each frame size kinematics. As for the geometry, the Habit is spot on for a trail bike. It feels lively, the bottom bracket's low so it stays online and in control on the downs, and I don't have to move my body all over the place to keep it online. I felt really centered over the bike and I actually dropped some pretty pointy lines on it. I talked to Ryys Audiotz, who actually designed the kinematics for the Cannondale, and he said that they actually designed some brake dive into it, both when you hit the rear brake and the front brake. They wanted less anti-rise, so to keep the rear wheel pretty soft on the ground when you were braking so you wouldn't lose traction. So that was their trade-off. I could use every single millimeter of its 130mm of suspension, but it never felt harsh on the bottom out, so I could drive it really hard. I'd say the component pick on this bike is spot on, but there's a little anomaly here and there. The rims are a little narrow, that's old school. And another old school thing about this is that they put SRAM 12-speed Eagle X01 high-spec derailleur on it to make the flash. And the rest of the drivetrain is GX. GX and X01 shipped exactly the same, so they could probably have saved that money and put that into a more important component like the suspension. The new frame design is just beautiful. It's a big step up for Cannondale, who's always done the edgier stuff, but fell behind a little bit on the beauty.
I really liked that it had a 30-tooth chainring, which was awesome for climbing the steep climbs that we have here in Whistler. I really thought there was amazing small bump compliance on this bike, and it felt super plush when I was going over small rocks and roots, and I could trust it not to spin out or lose traction on the climbs. The seat tube angle could have been a touch steeper, maybe 76 degrees or so, just to get a little bit more weight over that front wheel for climbing. The other thing I was a bit disappointed about was that I couldn't use the 150mm dropper post to full extension, just because that seat tube height is so tall.
It's far more capable than its 130mm fork. If you're an aggressive rider, you're going to be thirsty for more travel.
I think this bike is probably best for people who want to do long days in the saddle with a lot of varied terrain. So something like a multi-day stage race like the BC Bike Race, it would be a good bike for that. The one thing to consider for people who are buying this bike as well is that it's probably better for people who have longer legs and a shorter arm. So if you're a square or a rectangle lengthwise, it's probably a better bike for you just because of that C-tube height. And there you have it. That's the Cannondale Habit.
Be sure to check out all of the bikes we reviewed on Pinkbike's field test.